Welcome to Stacklebeck Tonight. I'm Eric Stacklebeck, and the war in Ukraine may have just entered a dangerous new phase. For more than 4 years, Vladimir Putin has tried to grind Ukraine into submission. Missiles, drones, artillery, a war of attrition designed to break Ukraine's military and its will to fight. But now, Ukraine is sending Putin a very different message. The war is coming home to Russia. On Sunday, Ukraine unleashed one of the largest drone assaults of the entire war, sending hundreds of long-range drones deep into Russian territory. Russian authorities claim they shot down over 800 drones across the country, but they didn't stop them all. South of Moscow, a massive logistics hub, part of Russia's largest online retailer called Wildberries, went up in flames. This wasn't some remote outpost on the Ukrainian border. This was the Moscow region. Ukraine is showing that its long-range strike capability can reach deep into Putin's backyard, targeting the logistics, industrial, and economic infrastructure that helps keep Russia running. And it comes as the human cost for Moscow continues to climb. Ukraine's general staff says Russia suffered close to, get this, 43,000 battlefield casualties in the month of July alone, an extraordinary price for a war that Putin started and once expected to win quickly. Now the war is threatening to spill even further beyond Ukraine's borders. On Sunday, a Spanish fighter jet operating on behalf of NATO shot down a suspected Russian drone after it entered Romanian airspace. One miscalculation, one escalation, and this war could take on an entirely different dimension. Meanwhile, the diplomatic off-ramp remains elusive. Moscow continues to demand terms that Kyiv rightly considers unacceptable, while both sides are increasing their long-range strikes. So here's the big question tonight. Is Vladimir Putin's war beginning to boomerang? Because it's very clear, folks, that the economic and logistical war is now reaching toward Moscow itself. Joining me now to break all of this down is our good friend, Dr. Rod D. Martin. He's the CEO of Martin Capital and creator of the Rod Martin Report. Rod, it is always great to see you. President Trump's view here has been what you've called basically commerce, not chaos. He's trying to use economic levers, Rod, to bring Russia to the table and to end the war. Is it effective? Is this strategy thus far making some headway in terms of potentially ending this war?
Well, it is very effective, but with this great caveat, Donald Trump gives everybody the opportunity to have commerce, and we can all get rich together. We can all have a better life together. Everything can be better. And if not, we're going to give you the stick. And that's exactly what's happening here. Not starting, but soon to have added to it. 3,350 of the new ERAMS missiles that are going to start being shipped to Ukraine here within about 60 days. An extraordinary system, significantly better than what they've had up to now. And of course, the Ukrainians are doing wonders for themselves with their drones. Now, that's a two-edged sword because eventually, there's nothing high-tech about what Ukraine's doing with drones. The Russians can imitate that if they choose to. What's interesting is that they haven't yet. For whatever reason, I would predict that before the end of the year, that's going to change. And so Ukraine's going to be getting hurt more than they are currently from the air, as much as they're getting that now. But the truth is, Putin believed that Ukraine was going to be a pushover, that they were going to lose this in 3 days. And here we are 4.5 years later. Russia cannot move forward. Russia is not winning by any stretch of the imagination. It does not meaningfully control that much more territory than it did in the first 2 months of the war. Yeah. In some areas, it has much, much less. And here's the crucial thing. Ukraine has now successfully taken 58% of Russia's oil refining and transport capacity offline. Most of that is never coming back. It's just never going to come back unless the United States goes in and rebuilds it, which, as things stand, there's absolutely no chance of that.
Yeah.
So if Putin reaches a point, or his oligarchs do, where they decide, you know what, commerce sounds a little better than this chaos after all. Well, sure. I mean, we can come to a peace. We can absolutely get to a point that is not going to make everybody happy. That's not going to happen, but happy enough that you don't negotiate with your friends, you negotiate with your enemies. That's how you make peace. We can get there, but if they want to continue down this path, Ukraine is on track to remove Russia from the board as a major oil exporting power within the next 6 to 12 months. And they're not going to be able to come back from it.
Yeah.
So Putin is destroying his country with this war.
Wow, Rod, a stunning miscalculation on the part of Vladimir Putin and the casualties. I mean, over 1 million in the past 4.5 years since he launched this war. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers killed, many more injured. Just a meat grinder, as many have called it. And after the break, okay, we mentioned Putin got himself into this. Can he get himself out of it? And who is propping him up? Who is helping to sustain Vladimir Putin? We're talking China, North Korea, Iran. More on that unholy alliance with Rod Martin after the break. Stick around. Welcome back to Stack Back Night. We're talking about good friend Rod Martin, folks. He is a must-follow on X. Be sure to check him there and across social media. Of course, the Rod Martin Report as well. Rod, Putin, despite all his losses, and again, as we mentioned before the break, severe miscalculation here. Russia's still going, and part of that is support from China, North Korea, even perhaps tens of thousands of North Korean troops, maybe that many, in the battlefields right now fighting alongside Russia, more planning to come reportedly. And of course, Iran's regime supplying drones. Can you talk a bit more about how this unholy alliance has helped to prop up Putin's war machine?
Well, the North Koreans help. They aren't enough, but they are able to produce quite a lot of artillery rounds and other things that help take the pressure off Russian industry. And that has been a benefit to Putin. On the other hand, you look at China, that's a completely different situation. China's embrace is entirely predatory. The Russians are forced to buy what they're able to buy from China, primarily in gold and in yuan. So, you know, they are draining Russia's gold reserves. They're draining Russia's foreign currency reserves, and just putting them in a worse and worse position. Also, you know, they're obviously the chief purchaser of Russian oil at this point, but they're taking that at an extremely steep discount. These are not the actions of a friend. Can the Chinese help them? Sure. Are they? To a degree. But honestly, Putin's in a bind here because the truth is, the longer this goes on, the more China's neocolonial ambitions in Siberia and the Russian Far East metastasize.
Yeah, I want to hit on China a bit more in a minute, Rod. Great points all around. Predatory, key word, as you mentioned. But what's the end game here for Vladimir Putin? If this doesn't go his way, could he find himself in jeopardy and his head on the chopping block as Russia's leader?
Well, that's exactly the problem, and that's why we probably didn't have a peace deal 2 years ago. Putin is at least in the game as long as this war continues. Now, at some point, his oligarchs might be done with him anyway, but he feels like he's in the game. He's got a fighting chance, and of course, that's true. The longer a war goes on, the more the odds change one way or another. The problem is, at some point, he can't sustain it. If you really take even more of Russian oil capacity offline, and back in the fall, the Ukrainians had taken out a third. Now, like I said, it's almost 2/3. It's just getting worse. And you're actually taking the battle to the Russian civilian population in a way that they were promised they would never experience at the outset of all this. At some point, you reach a point where somebody's got to cry uncle. And it might be the people backing Putin. It might be Putin himself. And that's where commerce, not chaos, comes in. Donald Trump has a plan for how to make this all work for everybody in a way that gives everybody at least some of what they want. That deal can be done at some point, but Putin has so far decided that it isn't this point, and he just keeps dragging it out. That isn't working for him, and
No.
we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah, and again, heavy support from the likes of China back to communist China, Rod. Some interesting news here. President Trump just put 14 new nuclear submarines under contract, a massive over $76 billion deal, 5 Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines, and 9 Virginia-class attack submarines. And he also ordered plans for the first new public Navy yard in more than 80 years. Now, big development as China is building up its Navy. Rod, you've called this potentially the best defense news of the year, but also very late. Unpack this a bit more.
Well, it absolutely is. I mean, we have let American shipbuilding atrophy to such a point that there hardly even is such a thing. And we simply can't keep up with our own pre-Trump demands. I mean, the law says that we're supposed to be launching 2 Virginia class attack submarines per year. We're actually launching 1.2. We can't keep up with what we have set as our own legislated target. Okay, well, but now we're also going to supply Virginia class boats to Australia. So how's that going to work? We actually need to be able to produce 2.33 when we're producing 1.2. Ditto for the Columbia class ballistic missile submarines. We're retiring the Ohio class ballistic missile submarines at an accelerating rate. That's where most of America's nuclear deterrent is fielded, on those subs. They are hitting the end of their life cycle. You can't actually extend it. So you've got to build these Columbia class boats as quickly as possible. Now, what does what the president just did mean? It means that we actually start having enough shipyard capacity to do these things. We are paying the manufacturers enough money that they can actually expand their production lines, actually hire more skilled people, train people who maybe aren't as skilled, but get them up and running so that we actually recreate a proper naval shipbuilding industry in this country. And of course, that 5th public shipyard that you mentioned, private shipyards build the fleet, public shipyards maintain it, and we do not have enough of either.
And it could be a boon to the economy. So many benefits, obviously, and most of all, our national security, Rod. About a minute left before the break, then we'll bring you right back. China right now, would you say, Rod, is this the largest military buildup by a nation since World War II, including their nuclear buildup?
Unquestionably, it dwarfs everything. The nuclear buildup is especially scary because they have tripled their number of nuclear weapons in just a very short number of years. They're on track to double that again by 2030 or 2031. So that is greatly destabilizing. You know, deterrence works because we know about how many weapons the Russians have. We know about how many weapons the Americans have. You counterbalance that. You add a third party here that could conceivably gang up on you with the Russians, and it puts you into just an incredible arms race if something doesn't happen, either a new treaty or Trump's Golden Dome. But Congress needs to quit dragging its feet on Golden Dome.
Yes.
We have to obsolete these weapons. We're not going to be able to work this out through a treaty. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, Rod, very well said. Okay, folks, we've covered the largest land war in Europe since World War II. We've covered the rise of China. Now we're going to head to the world's most volatile and strategic region. You guessed it, the Middle East. The latest on Iran and a new alliance of Islamic nations, including a nuclear-armed Islamic nation that you're going to want to hear about. More with Rod D. Martin after the break. Don't move. Welcome back to Stack Back Night. We're continuing our conversation with the one and only Rod D. Martin. Be sure to follow him, folks, on X. Check out the Rod Martin Report. Rod, a major new alliance is taking shape in the Middle East, one that could alter potentially the balance of power across the region. You've got Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and nuclear-armed Pakistan. They've entered into a collective defense pact. It's obviously raising some big questions about Iran, Israel, and American interests. What's your take on this?
At least in the near term, this is a net positive. Certainly, there are all kinds of ways this could go horribly awry at some point in the future, although I honestly wouldn't give it that great a life expectancy. I think it probably lasts about as long as Cento or the United Arab Republic did, which was, like the lifespan of a fruit fly. So I'm not that concerned about it in the long term. In the short term, just look at a map. You've got Pakistan on Iran's eastern border. You've got Saudi Arabia right across the Persian Gulf from them. You've got Turkey in the northwest of Iran, bordering Iran. And two of those three countries have been attacked by Iran. Never mind that they're sitting out this war. Never mind that they're not attacking Iran. Iran is nevertheless attacking them. Less Turkey than Saudi, and not at all Pakistan, but Pakistan is a little sick and tired, honestly, of the Iranians supporting the Taliban, who are actually conducting a low-level war inside Pakistan as we speak. So you look at all this, it's pretty clearly a defensive alliance aimed at our number one current conflict, and that's a net positive for the United States.
Yeah, Turkey, obviously, second largest military in NATO, Pakistan, a nuclear power, the Saudis with their economic and oil might. So it's a very interesting alliance, no doubt. And by the way, Rod, as you know, it's akin to NATO in that if one is attacked, supposedly the others will defend their partner. We'll see if that happens because Iran and the Houthis continue to target the Saudis as we speak. Speaking of Iran, President Trump the other day, Rod, said, look, yes, oil and gas prices are up, not as severely as many thought before this war started, but he said, look, it's worth it to weaken and hopefully just destroy the world's number one state sponsor of terror, the Iranian regime, before it can acquire the bomb. Here's a shot from President Trump. Take a look.
So I just say this. So for you to pay a tiny little bit more for your gasoline, just remember, you're doing it so that a very evil country cannot have a country. Really, it's the number one state sponsor of terror in the world. We don't want to have them have a nuclear weapon. So remember that when you have to pay a little bit more, you're at $4. It's okay. I mean, it's I'll never apologize. I did the right thing.
Rod, he did do the right thing, what his 7 predecessors failed to do, and finally confronted this evil regime in Tehran. I think he makes a great point about oil and gas prices. It's not pleasant, of course, but is this what's necessary, again, to prevent an insane, apocalyptic jihadist regime from acquiring the bomb?
Well, first, you're exactly right. And of course it is. And of course it needed to be done. And of course it needed to be done a long time ago before they got to the point where they could become the armament, the direction, and the funding source for every armed conflict in the Middle East, bar none. It doesn't really matter where you look. If you're talking about the Houthis in Yemen, if you're talking about Hezbollah tearing up Lebanon now for pretty much 50 years, if you're talking about the Gaza war, you pick a war and Iran is openly behind it. So until you solve that problem, until you chop the head off that snake, peace in the Middle East is impossible, even in the short run, and American troops are bogged down there forever and ever. Amen. So, the president's aim here, as in every theater, is to create local defensive structures that make it possible for America not to have to do all the lifting, not to always have to provide boots on the ground. And then if you really have a crisis, let's say Putin invaded Poland, let's say China invaded Taiwan, we wouldn't be bogged down somewhere. We could respond with decisive force immediately wherever that's needed. That's a vastly superior approach to this. But the other thing that gets missed is that the net result of this conflict is going to be not only a dramatic reduction in the price of oil, not a reduction in the price to February, a reduction in the price to something from decades ago, because the Iranian threat to Hormuz has been a $10 to $20 risk premium in the price of oil for the last 40 years. That's going to go away. It's going to go away in two respects. First, removing Iran's ability to threaten the strait. Second, in the plethora of pipelines that are getting constructed, the Gulf states are going to be able to ship something like 70% of the oil that used to go through the Strait of Hormuz by pipeline to other seas that Iran can't reach. That's an extraordinary development. But the bigger thing, of course, is that the whole world is coming to the Gulf of America to buy oil and liquefied natural gas, LNG. That is a game changer. We are shifting the center of gravity in global energy from Russia, from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of America. And that means an insane number of American jobs, investment, and prosperous futures.
President Trump is playing the long game. And look, he said, Rod, I'm patient. I have all the time in the world with Iran. I'm taking my time. The midterms are coming up in November. The economy, I believe, is about to boom. And you've written a bunch about this. Less than a minute left. What's your outlook? Early on still, but the midterms, as you have communists and Islamists on the Democrat side, how are you feeling about the midterms at this still relatively early stage?
Pretty bullish. I mean, historically, of course, the party in the White House loses the election. That's just part of it. And I think Trump factored that in from before he took office again. However, the truth is, the numbers are the Democrats would have to pick up 2/3 of the competitive House races to be able to eke out a very slim majority. I don't see any math where they're going to pick up the Senate. So we're probably going to have at least an upset in part compared to what the pundits are claiming. And if the president ends up in control of both houses of Congress, he's going to romp and stomp for his last 2 years.
Yeah, no doubt. It's going to be very interesting. Man, less than 2 months left now. A little close to 3, I guess, but we're getting there. And Rod, you're following it every step of the way. Thanks for your great breakdown, as always. So follow him X, across social media, The Rod Martin Report. Rod, God bless. Keep up the great work. We'll see you again soon. Up next, my final thoughts. Stick around. Welcome back to Stack Back Tonight, folks. As we wrap up here, look, we did a great around-the-world journey and breakdown with our good friend Rod D. Martin. It's a crazy world, needless to say, from Russia, China, the Middle East, and beyond. Here's the good news. Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you, Jesus said. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives, so do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. That's the key. God is on the throne. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So if you feel a little faint as you follow all this crazy news, remember that he will never leave you or forsake you. More great stuff to come here on Stack Back Tonight tomorrow night. Until then, God bless you. We'll see you soon.